Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So obviously this past weekend, I watched the return of Anthony Joshua on Dazn. And you know, the whole event in my opinion was rather lackluster. You know, the undercard was weak. The Fabio Wardley stoppage once again was way too premature. I may make a separate video on that later, who knows. And yeah, overall, the event wasn't particularly great. The main event, in my opinion, wasn't all that enthralling. Too much clinching, too much holding, etc., that sort of thing. And yeah, the event as a whole wasn't great. To make matters worse, I had to listen to the Dazn commentary team, the analysts, etc. And once again I was left shaking my head. Is anybody else sick of the vibe on Dazn when it comes to the Matchroom shows? Not so much the USA shows. I think the commentary on the USA shows, the commentary is still pretty bad. But it's not, I can stomach it, but when it comes to these UK shows, when I watch these analysts, the presenters, when I listen to the commentators, to me it just strikes me as jobs for the boys. They are there not because they are good at their jobs, but because they know Eddie Hearn, they get along with Eddie Hearn, you know, that sort of thing. And I'm talking about the ex-fighters on Dazn, you know, who are now pundits, analysts and commentators. Quite frankly, the only person on the Dazn production team I can really stomach is Mike Costello, who is the lead commentator. I know a lot of people are not too keen on him due to his radio style, but I quite like him. But aside from that, the jobs for the boys atmosphere that seeps through the Dazn broadcasts, to me is a little nauseating at this point in time. You know, the biased nature of the coverage is just, it's not even subtle. I know this is a problem for every network. You know, like ESPN show bias towards top-ranked fighters, Showtime will show bias towards PBC fighters, but I don't think they're on the level of Dazn when it comes to just pure shillery and pom-pom waving, because that's essentially what most of these boxing analysts are on Dazn, is glorified cheerleaders masquerading as boxing analysts. That now brings us to Tony Bellew. Once again, what is his job title at Dazn? I'm sure it's something like Chief Boxing Analyst, something like that, something silly like that. When was the last time you ever heard Tony Bellew say something about a fight and you said to yourself, well, I never saw that, or I never thought about that? Honestly, I don't think Tony Bellew has ever made me second guess my own opinions on what I'm seeing. As a boxing analyst on a technical level, I think Tony Bellew is pretty poor. He doesn't break fights down technically or anything along those lines. He is ridiculously biased when it comes to his takes, usually, well, always in favour of the home fighter, the matchroom fighter. And again, he's a cheerleader masquerading as a boxing analyst. That would describe Tony Bellew in a nutshell on Dazn. And we all know why he's there. It's because of his close relationship with Eddie Hearn. It's not because he's a good speaker. He's not particularly articulate. He's extremely biased. He doesn't break fights down in any real substantial way. He doesn't educate people on boxing. Maybe the real layman he does. But anybody who's been watching boxing for a long time, Tony Bellew's not going to come out with something that kind of you know, blows your mind. He's not that guy. And when this guy is at matchroom shows in the UK, when one of his friends are fighting, it becomes so tedious. This guy's voice travels through an arena like I don't know what. Because, do you guys recall, this wasn't on Dazn. This was when Derek Chisora fought Alexander Usyk. And, bro, all you could hear for 12 rounds was Tony Bellew be a cheerleader for Derek Chisora. It was among one of the most embarrassing things I've I've ever come across when it comes to British boxing. And I think after that fight, I may be wrong, my memory may be hazy, but I'm pretty sure Tony Bellew said that he thought Chisora won, or got a draw, something like that. Again, this guy is paid to neutrally observe what he is watching and then report back to the viewers, maybe educating them along the way. But that's not what Tony Bellew does. And we saw this weekend, once again, Tony Bellew just exposing himself for what he is. A brown-noser, an arse-licker, and a pom-pom waving chump. After the fight with Anthony Joshua, after the bell went at the end of the 12th round, Anthony Joshua and Jermaine Franklin had a bit of a coming together. AJ patted him on the head, a bit hard, you know. Jermaine Franklin turned around, had a word. AJ then came over and kind of hugged him. And he did it in a manner to where he was kind of mocking Jermaine Franklin like he was in a clinch kind of thing, because Jermaine Franklin and his team were complaining about that throughout the fight. Once that happened, it set Jermaine Franklin's team off. There was a little bit of a ruckus after the fight. And then Tony Bellew, defending his man crush, Anthony Joshua, gets up and he has words with one of Jermaine Franklin's training team. I think maybe the co-trainer. I don't think it was Jermaine Franklin's trainer, but maybe a co-trainer. And yeah, Tony Bellew was offering this guy out for a fight. Again, Mr. Impartial, Tony Bellew. And again, the ruckus at the end of a fight, it wasn't like, it never looked like it was going to get out of hand. You know, just a couple of hot tempers. But that set Tony Bellew off. I mean, I'm sure if he was impartially viewing this fight, he could agree that some of the clinching from Joshua became excessive in certain rounds. And, you know, Jermaine Franklin's team have some things to complain about in regards to how the referee officiated this fight. And by the way, it was Joshua who initiated that by tapping Jermaine Franklin on the head in like a patronising style, like a you know, your scum style, like you're a peasant, you're below me. That's what Joshua did. Joshua initiated it. And yet here we are, man defender Tony Bellew jumping in when things get a little bit tense. Embarrassing. You know, I said on Twitter after this that these Dazn UK shows are among the most unprofessional in boxing when it comes to coverage. Because yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Tony Bellew should be reprimanded for such behaviour. And I'm not being a Karen, but like, there's been numerous occasions where Bellew has just made a fool of himself while working for either Dazn or Sky. The cheerleading, the shouting across the arena to support his mate while he's fighting. It's becoming a bit too much for my liking. And again, when it comes to these UK Dazn shows, I think there needs to be a lot more professionalism. I think this maybe stems from Matchroom and their kind of core demographic, because when it comes to Matchroom, they've always appealed to like the casual fan, like the football fan. I don't want to say the lowest common denominator, but it's kind of true. And that kind of seeps through in their coverage. The unprofessionalism, the pom-pom waving, and, you know, Tony Bellew is just the epitome of that, really. And, you know, to be honest, the rest aren't great. Andy Lee, by the way, is a terrible commentator. When he first started on Sky, he actually came across pretty well, and he broke down fights relatively well. But all of a sudden, he's got a full-time gig with Dazn. This guy can't score a fight anymore. He seems to ignore what the other guy's doing. Terrible. Absolutely dreadful. Weirdly, I mean, I would like to see more of Carl Froch on Dazn. You know, when it comes to punditry and commentary, because I know people complain about Carl Froch, and I agree he's not the greatest at breaking down a fight technically. But at least I know with Carl Froch that his opinions are his own, and what he says he genuinely believes. You know, he'll be critical in regards to Matchroom's top fighters like Anthony Joshua. We saw that this past weekend with his comments, you know, criticising his performance. But I don't know, man. There's something about these UK Dazn shows that really rubs me up the wrong way in regards to the presentation, the commentary, the analytical side of things as well. The vibe to me is just way off. Again, jobs for the boys. To me, I think they need a shake-up when it comes to the UK Dazn shows. I think they need a shake-up. They need to remove a couple of people, get a couple of more in, and try to be more objective. Start by removing Tony Bellew. That would be a start, because he is dreadful. Can we just admit he's fucking dreadful? He should not be a commentator. He should not be a boxing analyst. He's awful. He's absolutely dreadful. And, you know, I do wonder, after his latest antics, will Dazn actually step in and reprimand this guy? Because ultimately, that's not a good look for a broadcaster, as far as I'm concerned. It's not a good look for a broadcaster. But, you know, this shit only tends to fly in boxing. When I watch, like, Premier League football, there's not this level of bias. There's not this level of unprofessionalism. Yeah, certain pundits are bad, but I don't know, man. Boxing, once again, in every aspect really, boxing does scrape the barrel. We've said this before when it comes to the journalists. Some are the worst in sport, if not the worst in sport. And the same thing goes for commentary and presenting as well. Dreadful. Dazn need to shape up as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, what did you make of Tony Bellew this weekend? And yeah, let me know your thoughts on Dazn in general when it comes to commentary and the presenters. Let me know below. Peace.